Hello and welcome to Iron Issues, coming to you live on Spectrum Television. Of course, you know we're beaming live from you, the very beautiful capital city of Akwa Ibom State. My name is Francis Oyima Edet, and I'm delighted to be here with you this evening to talk on some of the major issues, but with particular focus on something that has been widely spoken about, particularly on the whereas of the just concluded general elections, talking about the national elections 2023. Now, the media is known as the fourth estate of the realm, and as the fourth estate of the realm, sitting at that realm in position just like we have the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary arm of government, it is expected that the media would see it and play its role as the watchdog of society, and thus being able to hold government and its functionaries accountable to the people through which they were elected to serve. But in the line of discharging their duties in the course of going about, doing their job as the fourth estates of the realm, media practitioners, media houses, journalists have oftentimes come under pressure by state and non-state actors who find their reportage rather annoying, or should we say rather a pain to them. And of course, at this point, conversations have been rising from across the globe around the concept of media freedom as practiced across different continents, and of course Nigeria. During the just concluded 2023 elections, we have to trace the history of abuses against journalists and media organizations. We can tell that a lot of journalists have been killed in the line of duty. A lot have also been harassed by security personnel. Now, one would be asking certain questions. Why do we have journalists who are doing their job just like we have every other arm of government being harassed? Is it because they are not provided for, their rights are not provided for within the constitutions of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, or they step out of line within the rules and guidelines that should have guided their reportage? Whatever the scenario is part of the things that we are going to extract today on Eye on Issues. And of course, my guest joining me virtually this evening to help us navigate this all-important matter that has to do with the rights, safety, and security of media practitioners, journalists, and of course, in extension, broadcast and print media in Nigeria, as Lady E. Ejiro Umukoro. She is an investigative journalist, publisher, and executive director, Light Ray Media. Good evening and welcome to Eye on Issues.
Thanks for having me, Ed. It's a pleasure to be here with you to talk about this very important matter.
All right. How are you feeling and how is Nigeria treating you?
I be for Nigeria and represent Nigeria every day, anywhere, anytime. So, however Nigeria gives to me, I give it back one way or the other.
Okay. It's quite exciting to know that regardless of what is happening at the moment, we're mostly preaching, and we do hope we get to experience that hope before we all die in Nigeria.
It ain't going to happen.
All right, that was on a lighter note. Broadcasting, journalism, media practitioners in Nigeria face a whole lot of challenges. In recent time, just during the electioneering period, we saw one of our sister TV station being slammed for something that was said by a guest on a show on TV. And this is just one of the different multiple scenarios that have played out and has been posited as one of the means by which government try to gag the press. Let's start with understanding the media and the role of the media in a democratic society.
The Nigerian Constitution is very clear about the role, the mandate, the responsibility, expectations, and demands required of the media. And that's why Section 22 was very clear that the media the media shall freely uphold the responsibility and accountability of holding government to account for the people. With a clear mandate like that in Section 22 of the Nigerian Constitution, it is why being the member of the fourth estate is no joke. It is not something to be taken for granted. It means that same amount of respect, dignity, that should be given to these other tiers of government is also given to the media and journalists in general, because they are part of that entire realm where you come from the first realm, executive, to the second realm, legislature, third realm, judiciary, fourth realm, the media. So we have like enforcement and implementation and follow-up of what each of these different organs do was designed deliberately. And remember, this country says we are under a democratic setting since 1999. And because that is the basis of any other conversation we should have going forward, it means that the media cannot be gagged. While there is freedom of expression, there can be consequences for freedom of expression, but you do not stifle or gag freedom of expression. And that is the job of the.
All right, it's a continuous process, and of course the media plays an important role. But it seems that this role of the media, in as much as it is provided for within the constitutions of Nigeria, doesn't oftentimes sit well with the powers that be, especially when things that are measures being put out by the government to gag the press. In situations like this, where does the media derive its power to fight back?
Section 22 is very clear. You shall at all times be free to hold and have the responsibility to hold the government accountable to the public. That is clear. So when we have law like that, we go back to it because it is superior to every other subsection of the law that might come. Even though we have extant, or rather some of these laws that ought to be extant, some draconian, hidden, inserted, minor phrases or comments in subsections of some of those laws. There are about 20. Enforcement of the rule of law and interpretation of it also lies with the judiciary. It is the job of the judiciary to now determine, have you committed an offense? Are you guilty or not guilty? So for example, if any person has a query represented or the data is incorrect, your right of reply, according to the law, gives you the power to be able to say, no, dear media, you have misrepresented. You have to give a rebuttal. And that's why you also have the court processes. The police cannot just jump in, for example, to quickly hold you accountable in the sense that they feel they can abuse that process and jump the gun. No, there are specific processes and protocols and rules of engagement when it comes to engaging an issue. So for example, the media is being tried to be Muslim in National Assembly. And that particular bill was squashed because it was clearly an indication where you are giving superior power to an individual to hold an entire system or profession in the palm of one individual to control. That kind of abuse cannot be allowed. And like I said earlier when I began, this is a democratic setting. And because it's democracy, there are different rules that govern it. We are not autocratic. And that's why all of those 20 limited laws still in Nigeria Constitution, where you criminalize expression. Expression should not be criminalized. Expression has consequences. And that's why you have the civic and criminal laws that are court trials, rather, the civic and criminal trials are for the public consumption. So they know that they can trust the judicial system, they can understand the processes, they can question whether they are being misinformed, somebody is perjuring, and things like that. When people learn how these things work, it actually helps sanitize the system where the rule of law becomes the order of the day.
Now, how do we navigate this rule of laws? Because yes, we know it is enshrined, the provisions are there within the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, but oftentimes what we see happening in a situation or a scenario that a journalist or a broadcaster, the military, taking over or arresting the individual. Now, we've also had circumstances where the journalists who are being arrested sometimes are being allowed to be on their own, especially maybe boarding journalists who are just coming out from school and then beginning their practices. Now, we know that there is NUJ, there are other union organizations covering the journalists, but oftentimes even these organizations get politicized to take sides with the powers that be. Now, when these happen, apart from the constitutions, are there other channels through which the journalists can actually seek redress?
That there should be a legal strategic framework to ensure that journalists are protected. As a matter of fact, we want to see a situation where we're going to engage the national attack, the press, because the law is very clear. They need to leave that space and the protection, one, exist without the media. We've seen how whether it's PDP or APC influence how even they are voted into power. So if you can use it as a tool for your purpose,
All right.
media organization, I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay. So media organization gives due respect to the dignity of their job and the self-respect they deserve to have. Now, when you have such legal human rights instruments within the spaces of the media organization itself, what now happens is how they engage the public, how they engage governance, how they report issues, and how they highlight things that are of critical information, or importantly, has to pass a bill that protects the rights and
Sorry about the glitches there, but of course, we're talking about policy direction for the rights of media practitioners, from the broadcasters to those in the print media. Of times, we still see that these rights are being infringed upon, particularly from the powers that be. Of course, these have created a lot of concerns in the minds of practitioners within the media field. People who are aspiring to be media practitioners are also worried as to their safety and security, and in extension, or by extension, that of their family, friends and loved ones, because sometimes we've seen where the individual that is being involved is out of rage, the next target.
Okay. Oh, good to have. I'm happy you raised the issue of molestation, assault, harassment, destruction of properties of media organizations like their laptops, their cameras, even the invasion of media premises. For example, the DSS, the police, should not see themselves as people who can easily be for hire. So there should not be a case of police for hire, DSS for hire, as we've seen around us, where somebody of significant importance, or somebody of power, or somebody with plenty of wealth and cash to throw around actually muzzles or influences the DSS or the police to go after individuals. That is so wrong. It should not be tolerated at all at any level. So we need to get to a point where they themselves, these agencies, these security agencies, need to respect the point where professionalism, ethics, and the balancing of the various organs ensure that they investigate issues in their own capacity when it is raised before them. It is not their job to become the court, the judge, and the jury. It is not their job to deny the public access to, through the press, for example, to observe court trials. And if individuals come to them and say, look, somebody has written a story about me, it is not their job to now jump the gun and now say, okay, we're going to arrest all of you, and then there will be no due process. These are very clear, specific areas that we cannot just jump the line, break procedures, break protocol, disregard the rule of law simply because somebody has paid as a piper and must dictate how things should go.
Now, we've also seen in some scenarios where journalists who are supposed to be doing their job also, for whatever reason, maybe gets paid by somebody to write something libelous or something. One of the reasons why some of the security forces, once they hear scenarios like that, do not sit down to consider the provisions of the law on the rights of the journalist. How do we balance these two narratives? The journalist who is doing his job and the journalist who is stepping out of line, who is now painting a dirty image for the entirety of the industry.
Two wrongs never make a right. You cannot break the law to obey the law. It can't work. So they have no justification for their engagement and the protocols to procedures and administrations of issues like this. That is on the one hand. Then two, there is no justification whatsoever for any journalist, any media organization, to deliberately use what we call the PR tool to libel, sensationalize, mislead, misinform, and falsify data simply because you want to carry out a vendetta. In fact, the mere reason or the mere ability to do that alone is sanctionable by the law, and you cannot go without justice. We cannot go without justice being meted out to you. There are the Guild of Editors, the Broadcast Guild of Nigeria, and all these various organizations that we have must come to a point where there is a centralized policy guiding every single journalist who is practicing. And as a rule, this kind of training and mentoring begins from when they're in their tertiary institutions reading mass comm or similar, any other information that is not true. Then, by all means, we all know that as a media organization, when something is brought before your attention, you do not have any justification to not investigate, thoroughly check, fact check, double check, triple check the information that is given to you, because you understand that whoever sets the agenda, right information with a call to action to create a society where the rule of law is obeyed, then you as a media organization, you as a journalist, you as a media practitioner must obey and keep by those standards yourself. Once you fall from that standard, I am not one to support anybody who breaks the law to go away scot-free. You will pay the consequences, learn your lessons, pick yourself back up, and you'll do better next time. That's why it's called the rule of law, and we must ensure it.
And of course, that's why it's called the rule of law, and we must ensure it. But there are different concerns about the statement you just made, Lady Ejiro. One of that concern is the fact that we are in a system of government where it seems the powers that be do not pay attention to the word obey or obeying the rule of law in court. We've seen different court verdicts being given to the federal government. We've also seen it happening to some state government. And oftentimes, these court verdicts are not being followed or obeyed to the later by the respective governments. Now, in this instance, even the journalists themselves are afraid that even if they were to take their case before the law court, justice might not be served. How do we balance this scenario? Because you have the law, yes, your rights are being provided for within the law. The law has given its verdict. But on the other side, the people who are supposed to obey the law, the people who have vowed to keep the integrity of the law, are not ready to obey that law.
Okay. One, the autonomy of the judiciary is very important. In fact, in this 10th Assembly, I believe that one of the conversations that members on the floor should be advocating for, and even the judiciary can succinctly actually come out to, champion this, is the fact that they need their financial autonomy, administrative autonomy, and the autonomy enshrined by the law given to them to exercise the presentation of the public system to be seen as working. That is on the one hand. Then two, we also have a situation where we did something brilliant. The Nigerian Proprietors Association, the Newspaper Proprietors Association of Nigeria did something fantastic when they did the information blackout, where every top legacy media together sat down and said, you know what, the last regime, which is what it was, became a regime rather than a democracy, right, was to gag.
Sorry about the network glitches. Of course, that's still a reminder that we are in Nigeria, and regardless of how much infrastructure put in place, until we get to that point, we still might be experiencing this. But we'll just take a short pause here and go on. Journalists, media practitioners, our rights, and of course, the role we play in ensuring we have a better, safer society as far as democracy is concerned. To stay with us on Eye on Issues.
the only one allowed by grossly abused. Our governors have to share police powers with the president as stipulated by the Constitution. We do not have a federal government police force. We have the Nigeria Police Force, which shall be administered, organized, and supervised by the Nigerian police.
No, my Lord, I want to say something. I want to say something here. Perhaps it might also enlarge the scope of people who should be invited here for examination. My Lord, if we cannot find those who literally murdered Abiola, who are those people who could be said to be the beneficiaries of the death of Abiola?
Rogers has linked you with some of the killings he did.
He never did.
He linked you with the attempted murder of Hebrew.
He did not.
My Lord, the Matters Council is leading the evidence in our matters.
Is this an adversary proceeding?
It's not, my Lord, but we can't be talking about cases which are in court, my Lord.
Is this an adversary proceeding?
It's not, my Lord. These cases are in court, my Lord. I'm just reminding your Lordship.
My Lord, sorry, my Lord, I think I'll be in cross-examination.
Legally Speaking, a program that deals with legal issues and questions we face as citizens of this amazing country, Nigeria. Legally Speaking. Join us every
Friday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m.
for Legally Speaking.
One truth not often told is about the transformation that Africa has undergone in recent decades. Africa is shaping its own destiny and should be referred to as the African opportunity. On Spotlight Africa, we paint the African picture the African way, laced with truth, detail, and the color of the African continent. Join Uyai Anyekan every Tuesday and Thursdays at 4:30 p.m. Spotlight Africa, telling the African story.
Glad to welcome you back. This is Iron Issues, and of course, we are coming to you live from the capital city of Akwa Ibom State, live on Spectrum TV, Star Times DTA channel 421. And you can follow us on our socials at SpectrumTv.ng to be part of the conversations. Not forgetting that this program is currently being streamed live on our YouTube channel and other social media platform. We are focusing on the media in Nigeria and the role of the media in a democratic system of government. What role does the media play? What are the challenges media people, media practitioners, media organizations are facing? Of course, we're focusing on abuse of media practitioners in Nigeria and how we can change the narrative and ensure that media practitioners, as the fourth estate of the realm, while practicing their profession and of course doing their obligation and duty to the Nigerian society, do not get exposed to any form of threat, any form of danger, any form of maiming that might come as a result of people who might not find the reportage sitting well with their interests or the interests that they represent or those of their principles. My guest this evening is Lady Ejiro, and of course she is a publisher and executive director, Light Ray Media. Lady Ejiro, just before we went in that short break, gave us detailed provisions of, reminded us rather of the provisions of the press, or the provisions of the guidelines that protects the interests of the media as the fourth estate of the realm. We also went further to talk about the need for a policy direction and engagement of government organizations to ensure that we form a different narrative to have that legal instrument to protect the fundamental rights of media practitioners. I'm glad to welcome back Lady Ejiro to join us, and let's continue this conversation. Lady Ejiro, welcome back.
The network is very erratic, isn't it?
Yeah, the network is
funny.
funny.
We need to have a legal framework for making sure that our internet infrastructure is back to how it should be, really.
I do hope we get to that point, but will we ever get there in Nigeria? That's a question.
We will. We will. We have to put our mind to it. We have to be more consistent and more focused on how we say the things we really want rather than focus on the things we don't want or don't like.
All right. The media has been doing a lot of saying this few days, and it seems like the present administration a little bit is showing the body language of listening or a would-be listening government. But the people at this point are not so sure, so certain of what that might be. It's just left for us to still watch and express the hope that you had shown so passionately at the beginning of this conversation. But let's come back to media organization. One of the things that we were taught while in journalism school is the fact that media owners also have when you're reporting for a media in the media rather, you have different interests to project, different interests that you need to be very careful of. You have the interest of the government, you have the interest of the owner of the media, you have the interest of the people, which of course your primary responsibility is for the people. Now, how do broadcasters, journalists, media practitioners, how can we balance these different interests and still remain objective, still remain fair, still abide by the principles and ethics of the profession?
That's a very good question because it's a very tricky one with a two-edged sword as well. Yes, because interest is the driving force here. And then the way the media has come to be, you can understand that people are beginning to even question if they can trust the media. And that's because of one, information overload, two, the agenda setting of media organization, and three, the fact that propaganda has gradually almost overtaken every media organization you can think of. That said, the ownership of a media matters. If you don't have a professional who owns a media or running a media, we're going to have a lot of problem because they will always think first of their own interest and their bottom line. There's nothing wrong with having interest and bottom line. I mean, you're there to survive and thrive and excel, but the interest needs to be discussed. Often, owners of media don't discuss their hidden interest, which often drives the editorial agenda, the kind of news that has been amplified, the stories they cover, what they investigated, or even how far they're willing to investigate very topical issues that may come up. Two, in hiring managers, experience is very key, not just somebody who has a paper certification in mass communication, because theory is different from reality. We're not saying that having the theoretical research-based background in the certification is wrong. Those are good. But when the push comes to shove, experience, which is garnered through time and exposure and familiarity with patterns and principles and laws and all of that, even the protocols and rules of engagement, comes into play in mitigating excesses, which comes to play in things like self-check. I prefer the word self-check rather than self-regulation, because regulation, in some sense, is a form of gagging. But when you have self-check, what happens is you become more conscientious as a media organization. You understand that, look, even though the law provides freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of expression, all of this comes with consequences because there is no infinite freedom. Even on earth where we live here, you jump from a story building, you are going to die if you just jump from that story building because gravity says what goes up must come down.
Of course, network again there. Gravity says what goes up must come down. These are just natural laws that we must, as humans, adhere to. We need to consistently wake up on a daily basis to continue to pursue our dreams, goals, and aspirations. Well, media freedom, the role of the media, abusive media practitioners, media organizations, as a focus this evening, and like Lady Ejiro has gladly enumerated, there are different scenarios playing out, which of course we, as media practitioners, media operators, owners of media organizations, and indeed the government, all of us have a role to play in ensuring that the media takes its full place, its rightful place as the fourth estate of the realm. If the network allows us, one of the questions I'd like to put forward to Lady Ejiro, once she joins us back, would be in the situations that we have the gatekeeping processes of media organizations being allegedly sometimes being biased because of the interests. How do we balance these face-to-face or vis-a-vis with the interests of the people that we are supposed to protect? But then, in case you just joined us, don't forget you can be a part of these conversation on our social, SpectrumTv.ng. And of course, you can leave a comment in real time and we'll be able to see those comments and take them real live on the show this evening. Don't forget, Eye on Issues is also always going to be here with you every Tuesdays and Fridays, 7 to 8 p.m. to navigate some of the very critical topical issues bordering on our collective growth and development as a people. I'm hoping that the network has allowed Lady Ejiro joined us back so we continue this conversation. Hello, Lady Ejiro, are we back together? Okay, I think the network is still freezing there. I'm going to take a short break while we try to reconnect with Lady Ejiro, and then once we do that, we'll come back to wrap up our conversation on today's edition of Eye on Issues. Please stay with us.
Every society is premised on the quality of relationships forged by its inhabitants. The health of these relationships determines how well people, relationships, organizations thrive and how long they stick together. Join Uyai Anyekan on Connect every Wednesday from 6 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. and on Sunday 2:30 to 3 p.m. on channel 421 on Star Times to catch all the conversations, interviews, real stories and how to navigate relationships and family life in the 21st century. Real people, real faces, real stories. Connect live on Spectrum Television.
Business exists only to meet the needs of the people, but there's an extra advantage if your product and services are pitched on a platform that gives you the added advantage over your competitors. For your desired return on investment and so much more, advertise on Spectrum Television, on Star Times DTH Channel 421 and on free-to-air with a frequency of 12733. Spectrum Television, broadening your horizon.
Spectrum TV, broadening your horizon.
Glad to welcome you back. Sorry about the network glitches. If you just joined us, this is Eye on Issues coming to you live on Spectrum Television. We're streaming live from you, the capital city of the Akwa Ibom State. Feel free to connect us on our socials at SpectrumTv.ng to be part of the conversation. Our focus today has been media and the role of the media in ensuring a better, safer society where democracy, the rule of law thrives, and of course the people's rights are being protected. We're also focusing on the abuse of media practitioners, media owners, media organizations, and x-raying the role of the media as the fourth estate of the realm, and the need for different conversations bordering on the constitutionalization of the policy direction for the rights of media practitioners to be protected in the discharge of their duties. And of course, but for the network, I'm hoping that Lady Ejiro is back to join us so we can wrap up this conversation. Is Lady Ejiro back? All right, welcome back, Lady Ejiro. Sorry about the network interruption, but like you said, we have to keep trying and we'll get past it someday in Nigeria.
Oh my good Lord. I can't believe.
Okay. Before the network gets to interrupt us again, I'd like for us to just briefly look at, good governance. There's been a lot of conversations on the fact that without the position of the media, without a good media in a democratic society, we cannot have, the powers that be being deliberate about giving quality leadership, quality governance through dividends of democracy to the people. I'd like for you to enumerate a little bit about the role the media plays in ensuring that government officials, the people in position of power and authority, actually do the job that they were elected to do for the people. Seems like we've lost Lady Ejiro there again. Fortunately, probably we have to extend this conversation to another day on Eye on Issues because the network is a little bit unfriendly with us this evening, probably because of weather conditions. But in the spirit of expressing hopes, I shared in the sentiment of Lady Ejiro, who says Nigeria is going to get better. And we're going to get to that point where you pay for services and you actually get quality. And so the question of interference for service providers and different networks that we use to do things over the internet will not be a concern to Nigerians, particularly media practitioners. But I'm afraid on today's edition of Eye on Issues, this is where we might be forced to draw the curtains. But I'd like to appreciate you for being part of the conversation. And like I said, this is definitely a conversation we'll have to stretch to another day so that we can bring the whole of this to a logical conclusion. But one thing is certain, as far as democracy is concerned in Nigeria or any other continent within and outside Africa, the press, its role, its functions, and the position of the press is one position that should not be misrepresented, is one position that should not be gagged. And any attempt by the powers that be to gag the press or to manipulate the press in the interest of the powers that be, as opposed to the press being the watchdog and playing its watchdog role of ensuring that people in position of power and authority are held accountable to the generality of the public whom they sworn an oath to protect, who they sworn an oath to serve, who they sworn an oath to ensure that they lead by example and ensure the enthronement of the rule of law, the provisions of dividends of democracy, and preferring of solutions to the myriad of problems and challenges that people might be facing as the days progresses. And of course, we know that as far as Nigeria is concerned, the conversations about press freedom, media freedom, and of course the fundamental rights of media practitioners is a continuum until we get to a point where there are policy statements that have been made laws to protect this right, and then of course the powers that be are committed to actually obeying court orders and court directive and obeying the rule of law, then we'll continue to have this conversation. But in the words of Lady Ejiro, there is hope for Nigeria, there is hope for our institutions, there is hope when we united collectively as a people consistently speak against the ills in the society and then rise up with one voice to condemn it while also calling for right actions to be taken to right these wrongs. It is this faith and on this note that we wrap up our conversation on today's edition of Iron Issues. Thank you so much, Lady Ejiro, in absentia. So sorry the network couldn't allow us to have this conversation, but I do promise you, a viewer, that we are going to have this conversation back on another edition of Iron Issues, just so we wrap it up. Many thanks to you for joining us and being here. Wishing you a lovely weekend. My name remains Francis Oyima Edith. Thanks so much. From me to you is bye-bye.